at least what's changing.
Right.
This is not an effective voluntary commitment. That's why I was confused by it. Okay, one thing, the scariest thing, I think.
I'm sorry. Who were you going to say?
She's supposed to. This is a very nice. 300 seat school. So there's just some 400 seats. Yep. So that's a school. You don't. It does, yeah. It does look like that.
Okay. I know.
All right, good evening, everyone. I call this meeting of the Iowa City Community School District Board of Education to order on Tuesday, September 25th, 2018. My name is Paul Ressler. I'm filling in for Board President Janet Godwin, who is out of town tonight. I'd like to start by thanking those of you in the audience, as well as those of you watching on our YouTube channel. I'd like to introduce those at the table with me, starting to my right, Superintendent Steve Murley, Board Directors Ruthina Malone, Phil Hemingway, Lori Rotland, Sean Eystone, J.P. Clausen, and Recording Secretary Kim Coleman. All right. We'd like to start today talking about one of our teachers that we lost this weekend. Saturday evening, the Iowa City Community School District lost a member of the teaching community when longtime Hoover teacher Jeff Koecher passed away. As I reached out to the Hoover community to express my condolences, I asked a fellow teacher there to share some thoughts about Jeff that I could share with the community tonight. The following is what he shared with me. Jeff loved teaching. His passion for his students made him someone his colleagues looked up to. He was always quick to share advice or to be there for anyone to bounce ideas off of. He cared for his students, and the students loved his sense of humor. It shows in the picture here how much they loved him as well. He could take something as boring as a spelling test and turn it into a rap song. That was Jeff making learning fun. When he wasn't at school, he enjoyed traveling with his wife and riding his motorcycle. Jeff's love for music could be heard every morning as you walked by his room as he prepared for the day. He shared that passion with his students, and they tolerated, in their words, the old man music. Jeff was also very proud of his two sons and their Marine service, and he adored his daughter, who is currently a senior in college. With that being said, I would ask that we would all take a moment to observe a moment of silence in honor of Jeff Koecher. Thank you. I'd just like to follow that up with comments on my own. Solomon Ortiz once said, "Education is the key to success in life, and teachers make a lasting impact in the lives of their students." As I mentioned before, I can tell in this picture that Mr. Koecher made that impact on his students. As a third grader at Robert Lucas Elementary here in Iowa City, I was a student, and I suffered the loss of our teacher during the school year as well. And when you're 8 or 9 years old, you may not fully understand the impact of that situation. And although I'm certain now that the teachers and staff at Lucas struggled with the loss, they found a way to never let it affect the student learning. I am very certain this is happening at Hoover as well, and for that I thank the staff there for continuing to educate our students and moving forward. The staff at Hoover has also asked that I pass along a huge thank you to the district administrative team for all their help and support during this difficult time. They'd also like to thank all the schools who have offered their condolences and provided, among other things, snacks and beverages to the staff. The support they have received has been incredible and very much appreciated. With that, we will move into our regular meeting. Thank you for your interest in the Iowa City Community School District and for your willingness to share your comments. You're reminded to give your name, address, and topic on which you would like to speak. During community comment, persons may speak to the board about topics relevant to the district. All community comment directed at non-agenda items and agenda items shall take place at the beginning of the meeting and shall be limited to 4 minutes per speaker. So the first item on our agenda is community comment, and we have one speaker, Chris Liebig.
Can you hear me? Okay. Chris Liebig, 6 Glendale Terrace, Iowa City. By the way, thanks for acknowledging Jeff Koecher. My kids all had Mr. Koecher. He's a terrific teacher, great guy. Huge loss for Hoover School. I'm here with a couple of thoughts about the proposals that are on the table to redraw the elementary boundaries and possibly pair some schools toward the goal of reducing socioeconomic disparities between school populations. As you all know, I was on the school board 2 years ago when the board decided to redistrict the high schools and the junior highs in the name of that goal. I found it a very difficult issue. I thought there were good arguments on both sides of the issue. In the end, I ended up voting against the redistricting plan because I wasn't sure that the benefits outweighed the costs, and there were benefits, and because I didn't think the plan had enough support from the families that were supposed to most benefit from it. When it comes to the elementary school proposals that you're considering, I think those issues are also difficult, and again, I know that there are arguments on both sides of that. I don't know what the right answer is, but I do think it would be very hard to square pursuing balance at the high school level, but not pursuing it at the elementary school level. At the elementary school level, the FRL disparities in the district are much bigger than they were at the high school level. Some schools projected to be at 2%, some schools projected to be up at 75% FRL rates. The empirical research on the academic benefits is stronger at the elementary school level than it is at the high school level, because most of the studies involve elementary school kids, and because at the high school level tracking clicks in, which undoes some of the benefits of the balance. And finally, at least as to some of the pairings that are being suggested at the elementary school level, there's actually a cost savings associated with it. Now, we were told when the boundary proposal for high schools was up that it was going to cost us $250,000 a year. And at the elementary school level, apparently some of it at least can actually end up saving money. So you can defend trying to balance FRL rates. I think you could defend maybe not going down that road, but it is hard to defend doing it at the high school level and not at the elementary school level. Now, we had an election 2 years ago, right, where it was a special election that turned almost entirely on this issue, and the district did vote to pursue for the candidate who wanted to pursue socioeconomic balance at the secondary level. And especially on the east side, there was a heavy vote in favor of pursuing balance at the secondary level. And now, those same parts of town have to decide whether they're willing to pursue balance when it means bringing these disproportionately poor and black students into their schools instead of sending them out of the schools. And so I think a lot of people are going to be watching and wondering, was this really about pursuing the principle of socioeconomic balance? Or was this just about getting these poor, disproportionately black kids somewhere else? Is that what the principle that was driving this? I think what you choose to do on the elementary school issue is going to answer that question for a lot of people, including for the kids who are receiving free and reduced lunch and their families. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. With that being the only community comment, we move to approval of the agenda.
I move that we approve the agenda under the contingency that if Ms. Laura Cottrell is not here, we skip over her presentation tonight. She's en route coming back from another training.
Second.
Okay, it's been approved and seconded. Kim, we're ready for a vote?
You know what? I'm going to have to do verbal roll call for this one because we don't have a spot in there that I can.
Could I
change to
interrupt for
action,
just a
so-
moment? We were
Sure.
going to pull Appendix 9 so that we
But
could.
we're
We're
not
just
there yet.
approving the
Oh, okay.
agenda.
All right.
Calm down. I got that on my list.
Craig's giving me the
Calm
signal
down.
here, so I was trying to make sure I was on task.
Malone.
Yes.
Hemingway. Yes. Rutland. Yes. Ressler.
Yes.
Eystone.
Yes.
And Clausen.
Yes.
Motion carries.
All All right, moving on, we now go to the consent agenda, and before we approve that, Phil, you have anything to say about the bills?
Yes. We had $5,178,000 worth of expenditures, 1 million and change out of the GO bond. We're still buying a lot of locally grown foods. Some questions were raised on some of the expenditures, and the answers were given, and everything seems to be in order.
Phil?
Can we pull item number 15?
Yep. Appendix 9. Anyone wants to poll?
I move that we approve the consent agenda minus item 15.
Second.
Approved and seconded. Kim, we're ready for a vote?
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
And then we go back to the items withdrawn from consent, and Appendix 9 was pulled.
Looks like there's a presentation there, so
If I can get to it. I got it.
All right.
No, Kristen, all right,
There. How's
so
that?
improvising.
All right. Oh, come on up.
So part of the Appendix 9 this evening is to look at the schematic design for Phase 3 of Liberty High School. And Phase 3, if you see on the screen, is that dark maroon section on the lower right-hand side. And that's the addition that will close the loop, so to speak, on the first and second floor and provide 500 additional seats in the school. So here this evening is Vitus Bering to talk a little bit about that and the design process we went through with the staff out there. And when he's done, I'll talk a little bit about the budget, and we also had some questions on parking, and I'll try and address that, okay?
Well, good evening. Vitus Bering with SVPA Architects. First, I wanted to acknowledge the team at Liberty. It was a very moving ceremony that they had in recognition of the construction team and the design team. They had all the students come out of the student section and the football players and say thank you to everybody. So that was really touching for us, and it was great to see that facility up and running, which was part of Phase 2. We're excited to be moving forward now with Phase 3. We've wrapped up the schematic design phase. As Dwayne mentioned in the site plan here, you can see it'll close off the east end of the classroom wing and create a courtyard space. It is a two-story building of approximately 38,530 square feet. This graphic is an image put together by MMS of the proposed courtyard space. Want to try to create a low maintenance space that is student friendly and can be used in a variety of ways. So there's a series of different gathering areas. There's a main plaza area B where larger group gatherings or events could be held with some raised seats up to the west side coming out of the building. There's a fanned area of rock stone benches that could be used for informal gatherings or classes. There's a gazebo under item C, ornamental tree in D, and some picnic tables. We put together two different concepts and ran them by facilities and Scott's team, and this was the preferred option as far as creating a very useful and dynamic courtyard space in the area that's going to be enclosed with this new classroom addition. In terms of the floor plan, there was master planning consideration given during the original planning for the high school for this addition. We did meet with the staff at Liberty High and confirm some uses and classroom needs. There'll be a total of 13 general education classrooms. Those will generally match the existing classrooms that were built in Phase 1. There'll be 4 new science rooms, a new journalism classroom, 2 student success centers. We did make some adjustments to those in terms of square footage to better meet the needs, having been in the building now for over a year. A large study hall classroom, some teacher workrooms, and some additional mechanical restrooms and support space. In terms of the building elevations and the building materials, this is kind of a 3D massing of the new addition. We're trying to stay true to the materials, the character, the aesthetic of the existing school, so that it looks, as if it was part of the building from day one. Again, an extension of what was created in phase 1. And here again, there's a couple of renderings. First one is showing what the school would look like coming in from the southeast side. There will be a new entrance along the east side that'll have a direct cut through to the courtyard space for maintenance. And then this second image is kind of an aerial from the northeast. You'll see down in this area, this is the end of the corridor. There will be a locker commons there. It'll be some nice daylighting and capturing some of those nice northern views. So we're trying to introduce daylighting in. And there again is the new entrance that will cut directly across to the courtyard space. And then just a general summary on the project timeline. We are on track to complete the next phase of design, which will be design development by the end of November. We're targeting completion of the documents in February of 2019, having the project bid by March of 2019, and then construction occurring May of 19 through May of 20. So with that, I'll let Dwayne make any other comments, or I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Comments, questions? I know Sean had some questions.
Well, I had some questions early on, and there's another attachment there that kind of helped answer some of them. So there's kind of some of the future growth choices. Is it sort of just 4 kind of possibilities?
I put your parent in the board folder. So yeah, in your board folder, your administrative content, there is at least 2 or 3 different scenarios that we showed that could be done. And with the cursor, I can show you that most of them are on this part of the building right here.
There's sort of 4 different, I think there was 4 different ones of kind of how to build it
We
out.
just put some blocks on there so you could see where they would go, and that roadway there could get pushed out into the tree line a little bit to accommodate those additions.
And each one of those was roughly another 500 students to get it to 2,000. Is that what it said in there?
Sounds about
Okay.
right. I think it was.
The other questions I had were around parking, and I noticed on that drawing that that's all new lot there on the east side there,
Yeah,
right?
this right here is
Yeah.
all part of
Is that
phase
about-
2.
Is that like
And
40?
this is, all this right here is all part of phase 2, which is going on right now. Okay? And when we're done with the athletic complex next spring, this will get put in. We'll have to leave a path for our contractors to get through to build the building and have a laydown area, but this is all part of that phase 2 contract. And right here is the bus office. It's not a maintenance facility, it's an office. And that's where we're doing that solar project as well. So, but this whole end of the project, and this is going to be designated staff parking because they can enter the building right here. So that'll free up some of the parking in front of the building. It's not on this particular drawing, but over to the south of the athletic complex, we left a parking lot off there as part of phase 2. We're hoping to pick that up as part of phase 3.
I hope you pick it up in phase 3 too. I mean, I think it's concerning.
Well-
Do you know how many spots are in that lot that currently has all the construction stuff on it?
Well, we cleared part of the lot, but I think there's probably still 50 or 60 spots that could be had there.
And that little east side, is that about like 45?
Over here,
Yeah.
yeah, it's probably close to 40 buses. The large spots are for buses, obviously, but I would say there's 40 there.
Do we have a estimated number for the one south of the
It was 200 plus, I think.
200 plus?
Yeah.
Okay. It's going to be needed, and if you're doing the work on phase 3, it seems silly to not do it at the same time, but
We can update those counts and drawings for the design development set, make sure we have precise numbers on what the southwest parking would add and what the staff parking on the east would add.
So, and that leads to my other comment, is that we're still working on a more detailed budget, but the budget for this project is $7 million. Some of the costs are going up. Right now, we're struggling with 12 to 15% over, but we have a lot of details to work out yet, contingencies. So when we do the design development, we'll give you a more specific cost estimate for the project, so.
All right, thank you.
The second entrance for the teachers, is that gonna be a buzz-in type of a thing? In our safety and security discussions, we're trying to get to a single entry. How is that gonna fit in with our single entry plan?
I believe there may already be an electronic access there for
Okay,
the staff.
So they'll have
They'll have their
a
fobs.
fob to get
Right.
in at that point?
Right. Very few of the teachers have keys, and they'll use fobs,
And
exterior keys.
what type of, there's some gen ed classes in there. We know ag education, and we want to expand career and technical offerings. Is there anything in there that can be visualized as being an ag education classroom?
That wasn't specifically brought up with Scott's team, although we do have one larger classroom that's over 1,000 square feet that can be used for multipurpose, could be used for study hall, could be used for some other curriculum that's added in the future. So there is basically...
Yeah, most modern ag education classes are more in keeping with a science lab classroom, or have that access. At least if it was you could have a general ed room that then could attach to a lab experience. We've seen that in other schools that have successful
Yeah,
programs.
the second floor, there's a large classroom, right, a science room there with the gen ed across, but it's programming. I guess it's up to the administration to figure out how those rooms are used, but there's certainly space available. And obviously, in phase 4, there's a lot of space and places could be built on the north end of that as well.
Well, the flow works better if they're adjacent, not catty corner, but yeah. And as far as how can you go back to the one before, Dwayne?
Sure. This one?
Yeah. Where is the entry door for our present career and technical?
Oh, right, this is that little courtyard off Career and Tech,
Okay,
and the shop is right here.
so we'll still have the access road to get in there with materials
Right.
and
Yeah.
equipment and that type of a thing. Now, I'm sure we're going to have adequate draining in there, that inner courtyard and everything like that.
I think the interior drains are already there.
Yep.
They were installed as part of phase 1.
Okay.
I think is that central plaza area is actually set down, which I think provides a little extra safety, in terms of storm drainage. It's 3 or 4 steps down from the finished floor elevation.
We can retain
It could be a fish
some
pond.
water for a
Something
while.
goes wrong in the drain,
like
get
this
clogged.
after.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Kind of an impromptu flash session, okay. And I'm assuming Ben has looked into what type of materials you're gonna put in there as far as your,
Ben actually helped lay this
on
out. It looks to me like there's 15 twice as 30, and there might even be between 50 and 60 in this distance from this tree to that tree. There might even be as many as 50 to 60 spots there. Yeah.
Any other questions or comments?
I move that we approve Appendix 9.
Second.
It's been approved and moved and seconded to approve Appendix 9. Kim, we're ready for a vote.
Online voting is open.
Thanks.
Excuse me. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, thank you. Moving on, and I see Laura is here, so we are ready for the comprehensive equity update. Came in right on time.
Yep. I'm getting it up here for you. Hang on a second. I'm filling in for Kristen, so you have to be patient with me. All right. You're on.
All right, I'm gonna go through the comprehensive equity plan, okay?
A microphone, yeah.
So am I just,
You can take the,
Or you can stand
You
at the
can take
podium
it.
up there.
There you go.
and is there a certain way I need to, am I, no?
no,
This just captures it for the video.
Make this easier for you.
Use this one, okay. Oh, awesome, okay. So I'm just gonna go through the comprehensive equity plan for everyone. Just kind of go over where we are and the services that we provide thus far. And so the goal is to improve the educational experiences for all children through culturally inclusive and responsive school environments and classroom instruction as measured by various students' assessments, like the biennial youth survey, so on and so forth, specifically focused on equitable outcomes for students in protected classes. And so there's 4 objectives. The first one is to increase the composition of underrepresented groups. And then the second one is about community engagement and awareness. And then the third is about reducing disproportionality in discipline, special education, graduation rates, student achievement for protected classes. And then the fourth is about incorporating a more robust multicultural gender fair curriculum and activities. So the first objective about underrepresented groups. Here's where we are so far. So what we've done, and I know we're in year 3 of the plan, so we'll be looking to revise that soon, is strategically recruited. We strategically recruited 2 administrators of color to assist at 4 buildings, and that's Kirkwood, Twain, Alexander, and Grantwood. And then strategically increase the percentage of administrators of color. And then I have there, it's kind of small, so I'll read it, but Principal of Lucas Elementary, Liberty High School Dean of Students, Director of Cultural Responsiveness and Diversity is me. And at the district office. And then strategically hired to support the Grow Your Own program. This one was really cool. Between 2018 and 19, specifically, 13 out of 17 administrators hired in new positions were internal candidates. So even whether they came from another building or were a teacher or whatever, they're homegrown. So that's pretty cool. Next slide.
And then you want to hit the note about the update. Chase, so the other piece that Laura and I talked through on this one is, well, there will be a more comprehensive update when Chase gets a chance to deliver that report to you guys in January, kind of about his strategy surrounding some of those efforts in conjunction with the work Laura's doing. So that's just the asterisk she has here at the bottom.
Yeah. So this is really just where we are right now, but he has a more comprehensive plan coming. Objective 2 is about increasing community engagement and awareness. This is what we have thus far. We have the equity implemented partnership between the U of I and ICCSD. That's the work that Sarah Bruck is doing. And she'll come in, she's gonna do a more comprehensive update for you guys as well at a later date. One of the things that came out of the results of the survey was equity walks. And West High is currently the school that's kind of leading that work right now, and they plan to do some of that equity walk again this year. Engage parents and community, and we talk about the partnership with the district parent survey. District app, the mobile app, has a translation feature for about 80 different languages. So that was very strategic. The Equity Advisory Committee and district parent organization partnerships. Also programs for relationships with underrepresented, underprivileged groups. We have strategic work done with the community ed program. That's where if there's a need for parents, parents are able to kind of get that need, whether it's like classes, it's helping to grow them. Immigrant parent focus groups, Center for Worker Justice Partnership, parent ambassadors, and staff of color supportive gatherings. which we have our first one coming up soon. Objective number 3 has to do with the reduction of disproportionality in certain areas, and these are some of the things that we're doing to kind of help fight that. And that's the implicit bias project. We're currently in year 3 of 3 of that. Teachers and administrators have received training from that. And I'm sure that, I believe that there's a plan for Surf City to go over some of those things at a later date. We have the cultural proficiency team. I totally worked with some former members of that and some of the lead people in the TLC program to revamp the cultural proficiency team and the expectations for the teachers at that level. But the work that's done with that group of teachers is to really kind of take some of the data that we've gotten from our partnership with the University of Iowa to look at some areas that we can help other stakeholders grow in those areas of cultural proficiency. So those teachers will do that work. We have the Equity Advisory Committee that partners with district administration to provide advice on equitable practices to the district administration board. Restorative practices is something new that we've been doing for, we're in year 2 of that. And we do restorative circles, we're rolling out restorative practices, some things that staff are already doing that I'm trying to help them identify as restorative practice so we can all use the same language. Right now, 4 secondary schools and 4 elementary schools are currently doing forms of restorative practice in a very strategic way. Morning meetings and mindfulness are kind of like examples of how some schools do it. Advancement via individual determination is our AVID program. And the AVID program calls for a culturally proficient approach to teaching and learning for identified students at Kirkwood, Weber, Grant Wood, and Northwest Junior High. Currently, there's a plan to expand that to a few elementaries, to all of the high schools. Equal Opportunity Schools, EOS. The Equal Opportunity Schools program removes access barriers to rigorous level courses offerings at high school level by strategically recruiting underrepresented students. I don't know if any of you got to hear the presentation from the people who provide that service, but it's really, really necessary, and it's a really awesome program. The 4th one is about a more robust multicultural gender fair curriculum and activities. And right now, we do have a multicultural gender fair team. As I'm taking over for Kingsley in this area, we have a plan to meet in the near future. But these are teachers who meet to help strategically identify ways in which we can be more culturally responsive in curriculum. So their main focus isn't necessarily about systems, but more about how we're putting that delivery back into the curriculum. And then we have the anti-bias framework through teaching tolerance. That's something that's been worked on for 2 to 3 years. I've taken a look at it. We've had some other eyes on it. It's in the works. It's something we plan to roll out in the near future. So here's our catalog of equity work thus far. We have our areas of cultural competency in the first 2 columns, our LGBTQ work, and then restorative practices. So I'll let you guys see that. That's the presentation.
All right. Well, thank you for giving that. I appreciate you coming. I think this is the first time we've had you before us as a board in your new role.
Yes.
And I look forward to the work you're going to do here. I'm very excited for that. I think you can see you look like you're pretty enthusiastic about it.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. So we're happy for that and excited for that. And one thing I think when I look at this stuff and kind of the work that we're doing with our boundaries and our redistricting and trying to develop equity across the district, I think it all kind of works together. So I think sometimes people see that maybe we're just trying to move boundaries here and there, but really we're doing all of this stuff as well to try and help that out as well. So I think it's great. So.
Yeah, I've got a few questions, if I could. No problem. First off, with the equity walks at West High, why aren't those occurring at all schools?
Well, West High was just the one that kind of decided that they wanted to do something around the data they had, and they kind of organically just came up with, what can we do? This is what we're going to try. And it was a great success last year. They got a lot out of it, and other schools have heard about it and would like to do it. So that's not something that is just saved for West High. It's just that West High kind of started that. And so we plan to roll that out to other schools as an opportunity.
Okay, well, whoever we have to push, we'll push.
I think that was also part of the implicit bias contract with West Winds through some of the Harvard Rides work and some of the study there. So that was a school to get it off the ground with. And then like Laura stated, that'll be some efforts to, we've already talked in some of our secondary principal meetings about how to replicate that process throughout. So, that was intense work they did for 2 or 3 days, but saw big payoffs from it. So it's something that I know our other principals have been interested in doing it. So
Okay.
I think the experience speaks for itself on that.
Okay, very good. Well, just so we try and make it happen everywhere. Academic disproportionality exists in the classroom, which is demonstrated by our low proficiency numbers at the higher low socioeconomic status schools. Which committee is analyzing the data for the specific teachers who continue to fail their students at the junior high level, and could this job be done by the deans of students, which at many of our schools are Black and Hispanic?
Ask that question again.
Okay. We know we have low proficiency numbers at our schools. And we can identify, which committee will analyze the data for the specific teachers who continue to fail students of color at the junior high level and high school level. Could this job be done by the dean of students, since the majority of our dean of students are Black and Hispanic?
I mean, I'll answer to the best of my knowledge, but I know that that's not necessarily how we're utilizing our deans at this point in time. The majority of them are used in the area of attendance and discipline. But at the district level, we're having those conversations. That's something that we definitely would love to partner with other committees to kind of have that sort of conversation around. But right now, there's not necessarily a task force specifically for that, but those are the conversations that we're having ongoing at the district level to try to figure that out and partner with those teachers to give them the tools.
And
Amy might have another take on this one too, but Phil, I really see that as all of our work. That can't just be, one person's role or live in one area. That's really, when that's embedded through our CSIP, through those big strategic plan goals you guys have, that becomes that whole team's work at that school building. And so the team answer to that question would really be, that's through our instructional leadership teams at each of those buildings. So the deans, are loosely affiliated with that, or assistant principals and principals, and then the instructional leadership teams at each of those buildings work to develop that CSIP, and then that becomes a whole school plan on how they attack that issue. So like Laura said, from the district level, I think our intense work will be looking at that SIAC committee and seeing where some of that work gets embedded through them to closely look at that data, but then at each building level, through that CSIP work, you would see that work getting done and analyzing those subgroup data sets that don't look as good, and then how are we strategically going to address those issues.
Okay. And of all of the committees, do you have a number of how many people from underrepresented groups, Black, Hispanic, Asian, are on those committees?
I don't have those numbers tonight. That's something that we can pull together.
Okay. All right. And I'm assuming all administrators were given an opportunity to be on those committees, or how was the selection done for those committees?
Which committees are you referencing?
The ones that you were referring to.
Like the Equity Advisory
right,
Committee?
Yeah.
Okay.
On the page where you had, let's see.
I think that's up right now.
Culture and equity, when you had like the cultural proficiency team, the equity advisory team, the equal opportunity schools, and all of those.
So like the cultural proficiency team, for example, is comprised of teachers who apply, who have an interest in that area and apply, and there's a selection committee and there's a selection process, and that's through the TLC grant. So that's a teacher-focused one. But any administrator is welcome to come to any of the meetings. I actually wanted to be super transparent with them this year and letting them know, here's the expectation I have for the teachers at your building, here's the, the schedule, so that if they wanted to pop in and help out with that work, they're surely welcome. The Equity Advisory Committee, there's a process to get on that as well. We're actually, and I see something back there. We're actually working on revamping some of that. We're going to work through that at our retreat that we have coming up, but that is by application as well. And administrators are welcome to apply. What's another committee here we have? Multicultural Gender Fair Committee is comprised of teachers that are committed to do the work at the building level. Again, like even with the Multicultural Gender Fair curriculum, I've already had some administrators have eyes on that. So the idea is to kind of like Matt said, we're all responsible for the work, really kind of, interweaving different stakeholders, so it's not just one, particular category of people looking at it. But Multicultural Gender Fair Committee, when we start having those meetings, they're totally open to any administrator who would like to come and help out with that work as well. And I'm trying to think, am I missing a committee? I think that's all of them.
Okay, well, thank you. And one last one. Where did I have it here? With the Grow Your Own, and we have had sitting, since I've been here, many times representatives from the University of Iowa saying that's the way to grow your administrative staff within, and has the greatest success because people know the community and everything. And that I hope we strongly look at our Dean of Students as being people to put into those administrative positions when they come open, and I'm sure that you are, but I'm just reinforcing that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I did forget the LGBTQ Steering Committee, which I just want to speak on really quickly.
Sure.
Was comprised out of the task force, and from the task force, based on the data that was collected from the U of I partnership, the steering committee is the group that wanted to say, okay, and this is what needs to be done, I have a meeting with them this week, and other silos of people who are doing LGBTQ work in our district, to kind of bring them together to say, hey, let's get on the same page and move this work forward. So I just wanted to give that update. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry, Laura, I have a couple of questions.
No problem.
Can you, if you're able to tonight, talk about what type of supports we're giving to our new administrators, especially the ones of color, any type of mentoring programs that we're ensuring that we're able to grow our own there? And then can you also talk about the staff of color social gatherings? Are those just for staff, or is that a mix for staff and administrators? And how frequently does that meet? Is it during the workday, after?
Okay, I'm gonna try to remember them in order.
repeat 'em
Okay,
if need be.
so our administrators of color are being supported through our mentor program, and I know Amy leads that. I know that they've strategically partnered our administrators with veteran administrators to get the support that they need there. The other question was about, give me the second question. Social gatherings, okay. So I know that our former equity director would do some work with bringing together staff of color, and he would have outings with them about maybe quarterly, just to kind of like be a support for them there. And then he would have something with the administrators of color to kind of support in that way, but never necessarily together. And so what I'm trying to do is bring together all staff of color, not just teachers, but like teachers, administrators, our maintenance staff, our lunch staff, whoever, if they identified via Power School as a person of color, that they were invited to come and do a social gathering. And there's an agenda, so it's not just like a meet and greet, but a kind of like wrap around to kind of say, we want to make sure you know that you're welcome here and how can we support you. And the plan is to have that once a trimester.
You know, that would be great to bring all of them together, because I think our administrators and dean of students can get a different perspective from staff, and they could probably feel that support from those people that they view as having power, and maybe get some helpful mentoring to better navigate the system. So thank you for doing that part.
Well, I have to give credit to the cabinet though, because that was I'm super grateful that they're allowing it to happen. So thank you.
Hey, Laura, I just have one, just maybe a request on the community engagement piece. I presented our attendance area development stuff to the Black Voices Project, and I don't think there's a lot of trust there between the district and folks, and it was a really robust, passionate discussion, but I came away from it, one, knowing I didn't have enough time to explain all of this, which I knew things are going on, and so I think there would be a great opportunity. And Chase, for you too, and you prepare the recruitment and retention, those kind of all of this stuff, and then that came up as sort of a, what are you doing? And in the 2 minutes I had left as people were shooing us out of the room, I didn't have time or really the background knowledge, so that might be one group to reach out to. I saw a Center for Worker Justice, and I thought, that is another group, but it looks like we're working with them. So if we could just reach out to those folks and just, say, hey, this is all of the stuff. Because on attendance area, I think the skepticism was, you just want to change your numbers to look good, and this is all you're doing. And so to have a more in-depth kind of conversation with them about all of the work that we're doing, I think would be really helpful from that community engagement part. And, one thing they mentioned, this is tangential to that, but they were sort of, one of their agenda items is talking about vocational education. And in that context, they were really interested in understanding how they could support parent engagement. And I kind of said, we want that, not just Voc Tech, we want parent engagement for families of color. I mean, that's been important for the district for a very long time. And I think they'd be interested in kind of understanding maybe a role they could play there. And I think they'll reach out probably to you, Matt, frankly, to talk about some of those things. But it was clear that they were hungry for kind of what we're doing on these fronts. So.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Definitely would like to meet with them. And I don't know, I know Kim Fitton over at Liberty is doing some work with family community engagement and working on a grant actually to bring to the district around that. So I'll make sure I wrap her around and loop her into that as well.
I think really helpful in helping us with that.
Awesome.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
All right, moving on. The next topic is the voluntary transfers, and just as a note to the public, this is a presentation and discussion. We won't be voting on this tonight. That will happen later in a future meeting, October 23rd most likely, but I'll turn that over to Steve so you can give this presentation.
Okay, so one of the things that we have been talking about, let's see, beginning here, is our current state of voluntary transfer, what options we might have in front of us, and how that might impact the work that you are doing with attendance areas. So tonight we want to give you a little bit about the current state of affairs and look forward a little bit to what things could look like depending on changes you might consider making as a board, recognizing that there are things that have to be decided in an implementation phase that have impacts that are based on that historical context. So I want to walk you through this. Please, if you have clarifying questions as we go through, stop and ask those. I know that we were working hard to make sure that some of the data was cleaned up before we got this out there, so it got up a little bit later today than we intended to. I know I've already had feedback from a couple of you about a couple of the slides as you look at them, because you're comparing maybe apples and oranges a little bit as you look at that, and so I'll try to make sure that I provide some clarity to that as we go through, and might have to do some editing after we're done to make sure that people who are looking at it after the fact understand some of that context. So things that we have talked about as we've gone through this conversation about attendance areas, and in particular some of the recent meetings we've had have been about neighborhood schools and walkability. And we know that in the last round of work we did on attendance areas that established the 1920 boundaries, one of the things that was a real key component of that process was self-defined neighborhoods. At that time, the board actually asked neighborhoods to go out to find themselves. The content of the actual neighborhood itself, streets, et cetera, ask people to self-identify. We wound up with 60 of those clusters. And so I think based on that feedback that we got, it's very clear that neighborhoods are very important to this discussion about attendance areas. Recently, you've had a lot of questions for us about walkability. As recently as our last board attendance area development process in the back at the work session, we were looking at an overlay map of Longfellow and Twain as we look at that attendance area. And so we know that walkability is a key component in determining those neighborhoods. So as we look at that and we think about the role that that plays in our attendance areas, there's two key concepts that you need to think about. Involuntary transfers and open enrollment, and they are two different things. Voluntary transfer is inside the district. Open enroll is from outside the district to inside the district. It's very common for people to transpose those two or to think that they are interchangeable. I just want to make sure that you understand that they're different. And that's because open enrollment is governed by the state. Voluntary transfer is governed by you as a board.
Before
yes.
you go forward, just a quick clarifying point on that, because I've seen that out there. Again, people have asked if we're going to end voluntary transfers, why would we also not end open enrollment into our district? And I tried to explain to them that as people leave
You
our
cannot do
district-
that.
Right. And
So maybe just a quick note on open enrollment. So provided that students meet the state requirement, which is that they apply to us under the timeline, then they have the right to open enroll out or into our district. If they do not meet the timeline, then the state has some good cause exceptions, and if those exist, they then also have the right to open enroll out or in if they meet a good cause exception. The one thing that we do retain the right to do is to place them in a school. So if you're applying for open enrollment into a district that may only have one elementary school, you have the right to attend that elementary school. If you're applying to get into a district like Iowa City where we have 20 elementary schools, we have the right to assign, and we do that based on space available. I think one of the questions was also asked that was shared with me by a community member was about the per pupil allocation that comes along with that. When students open enroll out of the district, the dollars follow them. When they open enroll in the district, the dollars follow them from whatever the sending district is. And maybe just a note, currently right now we have an open enrollment deficit. That is, we have more students leaving the district than we have coming into the district. Number's a little bit closer than it was in previous years, but we're still in a deficit. I'm not going to read through all of this. I will tell you that this comes right off of the application for voluntary transfer. I'm just going to hit a couple of the high points on here. One of the things that we did, and you're going to see the impact on the data shortly, but we moved from a permanent process where you applied once during your elementary years and stayed in a school for the entire course of your elementary studies to an annual application. And part of that was because we were experiencing significant crowding issues at some of our elementary schools, and we needed the ability to make that determination on an annual basis to better manage the growth of the schools in some of the areas of the district. So that key change took place between the 14-15 and 15-16 school years. Another note here, we do have the linear feeder pattern issue. But making a voluntary transfer from one feeder pattern into another does not guarantee you access to the next level of school, whether it's junior high or high school. We do follow a process whereby if there are seats available, we move folks in. If there are not seats available, we put people on a waiting list. If more people apply for the seats that are available, then we have the ability to assign. We do go through a lottery process in order to fill those available seats. Maybe that a last note, we do have quite a bit of mobility in the district, and so if you move from one attendance area to another during the school year, you have the right to ask to remain in that school that you started in. We recognize the need for continuity for the students, and so people have that ability to apply after the start of the school year. We've already staffed them into that school. There's a seat available for them, and so we make that option available to them. A very important note, families are required to provide their own transportation for students when they are voluntarily transferring. I throw this in there again. This is on the attendance area or on the voluntary transfer application, but we've tried to make it clear to families who are applying that boundaries and attendance area changes may require us to cancel a voluntary transfer in subsequent years. So if you've come in year 1 and in year 2 the attendance area has changed and we no longer have seats available, that's one of those grounds for not renewing a voluntary transfer in a subsequent year. And then the last note on this one, we have less need for this now than we have in the past as we continue to work to provide programming for students in their home schools. But in the past, it was very frequent that, especially for ELL programming, that we place students out of their home attendance area in order to get services. As of this year, we have ELL programming in every school. We still have some students, though, that are in a transferred school because they went in there under that ELL programming and their determination was made that they would be best suited to stay in that program as they finish their elementary years. Special education, again, we have some low incidence programs in the district where we do have students that are placed there by the district as part of their educational program. All right, now take a look at some numbers here, and again, we've done our best to try to represent these graphically so that you can see them. And what I wanted to show you on this one is, and maybe if you look at Twain right here, you look at Coralville Central, you look down here to Hills. This light green bar on the left-hand side represents a 2014-15 school year, and that was the last year in which people applied and were then granted a transfer for the entirety of their elementary career, and that was the case prior to 2014-15. You can see then beginning in that 15-16 school year, which is that second green bar, in many cases a fairly precipitous drop in the number of applications and movement from school to school. We think that that is due in large part to the fact that it was no longer a transfer that carried through your entire elementary career, but you went on a year-to-year basis, and parents were concerned about the lack of stability that that may have guaranteed for their students. So you see a fairly precipitous drop-off there. This chart shows you what it looks like for the 2017-18 school year. A reminder that we do all of our official enrollment counts on October 1st. So within just a few weeks, we're going to have the official data for the 18-19 school year. But as you look at last year, you can see starting on the left-hand side of the chart, you see Kirkwood, Wood, and Alexander, all three of those schools having more than 15% of their students choosing to voluntarily transfer out of the school. A couple of anomalies that you see on there, Longfellow, Mann, and Hoover, in parentheses, Court Street down here. We do know that parents who were anticipating the changes for the 2018-19 school year contacted the office and talked about moving in advance. Often with the younger kids in particular, as they were looking at that ability to have some more stability for their students over the course of their career, if they knew that they were going to become a student in another catchment area when the attendance area changes took place starting in next fall, they wanted to see if they could get in there earlier and begin their career with that new host school. So we do see more transfers in those schools than we saw in previous years. And then again, down here on the right-hand side, you can see some schools have a very low voluntary transfer rate out. The three on the end here, Borlaug, Lincoln, and Wickham. Then moving down, Shimmick, Horn, Lemmy, and you can see that they're all less than 5% of their students voluntarily transferring out. This is the data for that. We decided to put this in just so that you don't have to dig through enrollment reports and look for it. For those of you that are used to conditionally formatting, read left to right on here. These are the students in terms of where they live. And if you take any given school, so let's take a look at Coralville Central here, and you follow it across, you find the red cell right here, which is under line 8. You look over here, that's Kirkwood. You can tell where students are going. Okay, so this is students where they live and where they're choosing to go. If you look over here to the right, here you see Kirkwood with 25% of their students going out. And if you follow the line across here, you can see that most of the students that are transferring out of Kirkwood are going to Coralville Central, travel over here, again, school 7, that's Horn, travel over here, you see school 19, and that's Wickham. So those would be the three schools where most of the students left from Kirkwood and went to during the 14-15 school year. And again, from the enrollment report, we've provided you each of the four charts for those next succeeding 3 years. So we know that if you're looking at changing voluntary transfers, There are concerns about students and what the impact may have on individual kids. And so we wanted to give you an idea of some students that are currently out on voluntary transfer that you may want to think of from the standpoint of grandfathering them into their current attendance area. We've got 4 groups of students to look at there. The SINA students, the School in Need of Improvement, that's under the old No Child Left Behind Act, ended in December of 15. So we have students that could be as young as 3rd grade right now who elected a SINA transfer when that was afforded to them under the federal No Child Left Behind Act. We have students that were grandfathered in who had gotten a permanent transfer prior to 2014-15. And we talked to those parents and those students about the ability to continue in the school that they transferred into, because that was the language under which they'd originally accepted the transfer. So those would be students that would be in 4th grade now, so going into 5th grade next year. Capstone kids, we've traditionally allowed students who are entering their 6th grade year to remain in the school that they were in 5th grade. Those of you that have been through changes in attendance areas know that as we've redrawn lines, we've tried to give the students the opportunity to complete their elementary education if they've gone through a period of years in a school prior to that. And then, if you remember the last time we had to draw an attendance area, we looked at Grant Elementary School, and we had quite a few parents from 3 specific areas: the northern part of the Lincoln attendance area, the southern part of the Van Allen attendance area, and the northern part of the Wickham attendance area, who came in and made some pretty impassioned pleas for requests for their students to be able to remain in their elementary school at the start of that 1920 school year. And we talked to them about revisiting that issue, so we want to make sure that you don't lose sight of those students. And then that final group there is that good cause exception. We use the same language in our voluntary transfer that the state uses in their open enrollment. So if we have a parent of a student who may have experienced bullying, may have some health challenges, that we've granted them a voluntary transfer for those reasons. Those are the same types of students that we would continue to encourage you to think about when we talk about grandfathering students and allowing them to continue in the school of their attendance right now, regardless of residence.
And that's something that we would, even with our looking at that, that's a continuation. And
Yes.
so-
Yes, we would recommend that moving forward, regardless of what we do with voluntary transfer, that always be an option for parents. We are fortunate that we have a large number of elementary schools in the district, and that gives us the flexibility to meet a student's needs, perhaps not at their home attendance area, without them having to exercise the open enrollment process and leave the district.
And these charts that you prepared for us, none of these contingencies are
That's correct. Thank you for pointing that out, Phil. So if you look at these charts here, these are all, this 14-15 one is with the original voluntary transfer process, which was you apply once and it is in effect for your entire elementary career. And again, you see 1,126 students down here, if you see the cursor bouncing around, who chose not to attend their home attendance area, and that's about 15% of our entire student body. As you move into the next year, this is where you move to the annual application process, and you can see that drop to about 10% of the student body, and then that remains relatively consistent for the last 2 years. This is the percentage of students who are eligible for free and reduced price lunch, but you need to look at a couple of different things here, and this was where folks started asking questions as they were looking at the slides after we loaded them today. So let me pick a school which was pointed out to me and said, wait, how does that work? You see Lincoln and Man would be 2 great examples to look at. So this lighter green bar tells you with the current voluntary transfer process in place, what is the percentage of students at Lincoln and the percentage of students at Man that are eligible for free and reduced lunch. The darker green bar next to it says, what would it look like if there were no voluntary transfers, and these are live-in numbers, and this reflects the changes in our attendance areas that we see for 1920. So we cast forward and said, in 2019-20, with the attendance areas as they're constituted and passed by the board, what would those numbers look like if there were no voluntary transfer? So this gives you the picture of the future that would be if there were no voluntary transfer in place, with the current attendance areas as they've been passed by the board. Now, I'll give you a caveat when we're going to move down a couple of charts here in a moment. And you need to recognize that voluntary transfer makes some really significant changes in attendance in specific schools, because we have some schools that have oversubscribed to the voluntary transfer process, and if all those students return to that school, it would be drastically overcrowded. All right, so let's keep that in mind.
Steve, I just want to
Yeah.
clarify. So on this chart, again, you're using 2019 boundaries.
These are the 2019 boundaries for the dark green,
Okay.
2018-19, or 2018-19 boundaries for the light green.
Do we have a chart that shows
Yep,
what it would be?
it's 2 down from here. I gave you the graphs first because the numbers are, I thought the graphs might be easier than the chart, but perhaps not. So that's 18-19 versus 19-20. Voluntary transfer process in place, no voluntary transfer process in place. This is, you're going to see this again collectively as part of it, but I thought we should look at it separately. This is capacity utilization in 21-22. Now keep in mind, these are students who are currently in the system. So there's no accounting for growth in here. We did not roll that up. We just wanted to look at it from the standpoint, because I know the board's been talking about, what if we move some building blocks? So the question that we then ask ourselves is, where is their space under the current facility master planning process? So hang on to that thought and we will come back to it. This is your percentage of students eligible for free and reduced lunch price by school, capacity utilization comparison. Okay, now keep in mind again, we're looking at capacity utilization in 21-22. That is when we're done with this round of the facility master plan. We've got that process built out, right? But this is our free and reduced lunch eligible students for the 18-19 school year. The reason I thought it might be important to look at this was it gives us an idea of where might we look to some of those building blocks that we might consider moving. So I know one of the things that we have talked about at length is what might we do with Lemmy, with the Breckenridge neighborhood. And there's been a lot of conversation about what it might look like if Breckenridge remained at Lemmy. So this shows you what Lemmy would look like without Breckenridge. So it gives you a percentage of free and reduced lunch eligibility. It also tells you that given the numbers that we have at Lemmy today, that you would exercise about 80% of the capacity for that school when it's built out. And the reason that we did this is because in that previous slide we talked about grandfathering. So if you make some changes to the voluntary transfer process, it's not going to change in its entirety tomorrow. You're going to have some run out in there. You've got some kids that are SINA kids. It's going to take them a few years to get through the system. You've got some kids that were on the permanent transfer process that we've grandfathered in, that we would recommend that you leave in there. It's going to take them a couple of years to run out through the system. So we're really looking at it and saying, if you're going to do something with voluntary transfer, if you're going to consider restricting it from what it is right now, it's not going to change overnight. It's going to take a couple of years because we're going to have a few groups of kids that we're going to want to make sure that they have that opportunity to continue in their school. So to that end, we thought it was important to look forward to the end of the facility master plan and think about capacity at the end of the plan, because that's when you might see a full implementation of change to the voluntary transfer process.
And maybe you said this already, Steve, and I missed it, but what year would all of the provisions age out?
Yep, I'm going to pop back up here so you can look at it. So again, our SINA grandfathered students would be no younger than 4th grade this year. No, 3rd grade this year, 4th grade next year. The students that were part of the permanent application process for voluntary transfer would be no younger than 4th grade this year or 5th grade next year. So Phil, great point. Your grandfathered students in that permanent application, that'd be 2 years from now, so 18, 19, 19, 20, 20, 21, so the end of the 21 school year. The SINA grandfathered students will be the end of the 22 school year. Obviously, that cohort's going to shrink each year because it's going to be 3 grade levels and 2 grade levels and 1 grade level. Capstone students would be a year. So when you think about it from a stacked process, you've got the current 3rd graders who have 4th, 5th, and 6th. That's this first group at the top. That'd be the largest group. Your current 4th graders who would have their 5th and 6th grade year, your current 5th graders who would have their 6th grade year. So they've got 3 years to run out, 2 years to run out, 1 year to run out.
So 3 years from...
3 years total to get everybody out. that would be in that grandfathered process and back into their home attendance areas.
That would be the
21.
21-22
Yeah.
school year.
Yep. The students that are in the north area of Lincoln, Van Allen, and Wickham, we didn't make a determination for, and I could have grabbed that chart. I know Amy and I were looking at it. If you remember when we talked about Christine Grant, we looked at how many changes, if you remember that chart that said how many changes would each grade level have to make, and what would we consider to be an excess number of changes that a student would have to make. And we looked as young as the third grade students to see where they were at. And so we had looked at maybe 3 or 4 grade levels of students that you might want to consider there. So I think their run out might be in the lines of what the SINA grandfathered students are, which could be a 3-year run out on that.
Just a quick capacity question. I think I asked it at the work session, but when you're looking at capacity, you're looking at a no RAM model capacity?
Yes. So what we do is we just simply look at the, we use the template that Dwayne developed and look at that and say, okay, how many students can we put in the building? And then that allows us to compare apples and apples, buildings to building.
I'm wondering about the homeless kids. That's not included in this chart. Would it be possible to get a chart that would show us where those kids are enrolled out of and into?
Yes, I think we
Except for
could.
places
I
where
think-
the N is too
yeah,
low, but.
some of the N's can be too small in that. I can tell you that one of the things that you remember that we actually have 5 different shelters for students that we serve. And currently, all of those students are within the Twain Elementary attendance area. So I know one of the things we've talked at the back table about the work sessions is as we look at building blocks, is there a possibility that we can consider some of those building blocks being reassigned to other schools so that there's a more even distribution of students so that we can continue to provide services for them, but perhaps not have them concentrated as heavily in one particular elementary school. And so I know that's one of the things that we've tried to build into the building blocks that we've given you. We haven't been really explicit about it in the sense that we're not targeting those students in particular, but we're looking at the neighborhood itself and how best we can serve those students. But I think we can get those numbers provided that they're not in an N that's too small.
Okay, I think that would be great, because I do know that when they are relocated out of the shelter, many of them locate in hotels.
Yes.
So, and the hotels tend to be in certain,
Yep.
so I would be interested in knowing, like, for example, at Coralville Central, there's quite a few kids that come in from Kirkwood, and I'm wondering how many of those will be continuing
Sure.
to come, even if we do away with
Sure.
voluntary transfer.
And you know, one of the things that with our students that are homeless is we provide transportation to them if they wish to remain in their home school, and many of them do. But then you have others that, depending on where they are relocated, would prefer to integrate into the neighborhood that they're in and then request to make that move into their new home school, which is their attendance area. And that was actually the process that we'd used prior to our work with the state and their clarification of where students needed to go to schools. We were actually working with the homeless shelters on where do you relocate students and then trying to get them into school there so that when they relocated, they were in that home attendance area. But now we have to make sure that they're in the home attendance area where the shelter is located to start with.
And does that law require us to provide them transportation?
Yes.
Is it just 1 year, or
No,
for their entire
as
schooling?
long as they're considered homeless, they're eligible for transportation.
But once they resettle into a permanent location, how long do we need to provide transportation back to that school that they started at when they were
For
homeless?
the remainder of that school year.
Just that
Yeah.
school year? Okay, thank you.
So this was the data chart that I didn't start with that gave you the graphs that you had just a moment ago. So what you see here, this is 2017-18, last year. This is 18-19, and these are the live-in numbers. So for those of you that have been following along as we've talked about attendance areas and we've been working at the back table for the past few months, we've talked about live-in numbers. So this takes our 17-18 students over here on the left-hand side. This is where they were in school. So you can see their K-6 enrollment. So for instance, there were 428 students enrolled at Alexander Elementary School in the 2017-18 school year. Then we took those students and we said, okay, for the 18-19 school year, our current school year, if they instead went to school where they live as opposed to where they may be voluntarily transferred to, what would the number of students, how many students would be in that particular attendance area? I'm sorry, this should say 1920 up here. How many students would be in there? And so you can see, for instance, I mentioned Kirkwood earlier, if I'm on line here. So we had 352 students enrolled at Kirkwood, and there are currently 306 seats at Kirkwood, and there are 412 students who actually live in the Kirkwood attendance area. Eventually, we'll have 468 seats there, but right now, with the 306 seats that we'd have there, you'd have 100 students more in Kirkwood than we actually have seats for until the facility master plan is completed. This also shows the number of students who are eligible for free or reduced price lunch, again, based on the students who enrolled in the school in 17-18, and then for the next school year, the number of students that are eligible for free or reduced price lunch based on if they attended the school area in which they reside. So these are the live-in numbers for each of those attendance areas. So when you look at the enrollment change, some of the big things you see over here, when you look at the numbers themselves, just the raw numbers, if you follow Lincoln across, so you come across here and you see some significant changes in the number of students, or in terms of the number of free and reduced lunch price students. You got to keep in mind that there's a major change in the Lincoln attendance area. You see the same thing with Man. When you follow across and you look at their free and reduced price lunch numbers here and here. And then, again, a couple of areas that we talked about earlier were the schools that had the largest number of students transferring out. So if you look down here at Wood Elementary School, you can see that they've got 303 kids enrolled in this last year. We cast forward to next year. If everyone who lived in the Wood attendance area went to school at Wood, there'd be 440 students there. So they've got 137 kids who are on some type of transfer out of the Wood attendance area. So that's a lot of information. I did want to give you at least some respite and look at it and say you've got some time as we process through this. So I laid out all the meetings that are in front of you that we have the opportunity to discuss this, because I'm sure that there are folks that are out watching that are interested in where does the conversation go from here. I just wanted to make sure that I laid that out for everybody. So what questions can I answer for you right now, knowing that we are going to be both at the back table and back here at the board table discussing it in the next few weeks? And what additional information do you need prior to the next round of discussion?
All right, I'll just go first. I've had a few, I guess, just for clarity's sake, I guess, questions. When we look at the good cause exceptions, and you say it's the language right out of whatever the open enrollment language is.
Yes.
I'd like to know what that language is, and then who is responsible for interpreting that language, right? I mean,
the good news for us is it's relatively straightforward. So for instance, the bullying and harassment. If there is a founded incident, so it's been reported in a school, the school's gone through the investigation process, it's been determined that there is a founded, credible bullying incident that's taken place, that is as far as you have to go. It's not the content, it's not what happened, it's whether or not that process was followed, whether that was a founded incident, and if so, then that qualifies you either for open enrollment, if you're coming from outside in or from inside out, or in our case, if you're moving from one school to another. So I'll get that language for you, we'll add that so that you can see that, but it's relatively straightforward. When Amy and Matt and I have to look at those, it doesn't require a lot of interpretation. Health issues are another one. And those are not uncommon. You might think that they are, but they aren't necessarily. I'll give you, for instance, we've had people who reside outside the district but are employed inside the district and have a student that has a severe health issue. There's an importance for them to be proximate to their student during the school day. That's a good cause exception for them to request open enrollment into the district. And that's something that has been granted by another district and granted by us.
I guess I think that would be good information to have, because I'm pretty sure if you asked anybody who is transferring their child, they're going to tell you they have good cause for doing so. So without having explicit language as to,
sure,
at least by what the rules are, I think that's important for people to know, including me. In slide 9, you showed, the big difference between 2014, 15, and then the following years with the change to the permanent transfer versus annual. You kind of alluded to it, but I want to explicitly ask, is it due to a lower number of applications, or did we increase the number of times we said no?
Oh, great question. We can definitely share that with you, but it's due to the lower number of applications.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought maybe that was the case, but I figured I should at least check. And then I wasn't sure on, let's see, slide 7, voluntary transfer subject to cancellation slide. The very last thing on there is change in student transportation needs. What does that mean in that context?
I don't know if we've ever used that, Amy or Matt.
I was going to say, I think we talked about that in relation to Liberty. Does that ring a bell?
I have to go back and look.
So my belief would be there that we would cancel the transfer if the student had arranged their own transportation to be able to get to that school. And then for some reason their transportation need changed there and they needed to return back to their home school. So since I was speaking to a subject to cancellation, they would be, say, example would be they'd be on a transfer to Liberty High, they'd be able to provide their transportation to that school. For some reason, their family situation or transportation changes, and they need to return to West High School, then we would cancel that voluntary transfer and allow them to attend the home attendance area.
So if they have to provide their own transportation and maybe they lose their car or something where they
Exactly.
can't do that.
Force them then to continue going to the school that they've been at, we'd allow for the cancellation and move them back.
And I had one other one, and I'm reluctant to say it, but I'm going to take that first step down a slippery slope. But it says in here, current practice of what employees, they don't have preference in the transfer process, so they apply just like everyone else. I know that it's been brought up to me multiple times. Since very early on, we actually talked about how voluntary transfer would affect our whole work here, so it's not just in the last couple days. It's been going on. But staff in particular, in the school they work in, have their kids there. And as I said, it's a very slippery slope to start putting in any exceptions to any rule. But I also really value the staff that we have, and I would not want voluntary transfer to be a barrier to keeping our good staff here. I don't know what the answer is there, but I'm bringing it up because it has been brought to me by staff members in our district, and I think it's something that we need to at least visit in the conversation, knowing full well that as soon as you say, well, here's an exception, well, then you will be asked of what other exceptions can you get around voluntary transfers. I know that, so I would at least like to talk about that as we continue this process. It doesn't need to be right now at the table, but probably in some work sessions.
So in talking about that, because that was one of the questions, is there a way to get those numbers?
Yeah, I wrote that down. I'll see if
Okay.
we can gather the numbers, and depending on the end for that, if it's appropriate, we can definitely share that with you. We don't track that right now, but I think we can get that from within the system.
Then I have a question regarding the good cause exception, and been writing down different ways to ask this. So has there been cases where, we're big on getting parents involved in our students' lives? Has there been cases where we see that parents ask for their kids to be transferred out because of the working relationship of staff, administrators at a building? Do we know if we have any of those causes?
Sure. So from that good cause exception standpoint, if there is any type of detrimental interaction between students or their parents and staff, we have made changes to that, and some of those fall into what we call the other grandfathered students right here, where we as a district have made a determination that there is a justifiable rationale for them to be moved to another school. That's something that I think you would still want to provide latitude for the administrative team to make those types of determinations, because that's then something that becomes in the best interest of students, staff, and the building culture as a whole if we've reached some type of impasse that we need an alternative option for them from an enrollment standpoint. Not a lot, I can tell you that, but there are times that that's happened.
I just will add, I think we talked about this before, but this was really the first thing that we have to do before we do any of the other stuff. We can talk about the other stuff, but these numbers will affect the other numbers that we're looking at and things that we can do. So just so the people know, we purposely haven't arrived at any decisions on pairing or drawing lines yet or not before we've made this decision and looked at this data, because it will impact future decisions. So we've done it on purpose to get to this point, and then we will be discussing this and making a decision on this like I said, in October, hopefully, and then can move forward with what the plan would look like or what we're trying to do as a board.
And I know that I'm working on a request that Lori has in right now, and I think that anticipates this idea, so that if indeed there were additional seats available because a voluntary transfer had been restricted further than it is right now, then who might you populate those available seats with the intent of trying to create greater equity. So we will look at, and we'd be happy to work on that on your behalf as you look at it and say there appear to be additional seats available in school X. Is there overcrowding in any proximate attendance area? And if so, is there any neighborhood that could be moved into that school that would create a better balance between those schools? So I think that the voluntary transfer question is one that comes first, because I think that does then help us better understand what the attendance areas will look like in 1920, and where you might look at some changes to many of those building blocks that you've been discussing for the last 2 months.
Any other questions or discussion?
Steve, I'm just curious, and this is really putting you on the spot, so feel free to not answer. Do you have a recommendation?
Yeah, I'd look at it, and I'd recommend that we look at further restricting the voluntary transfer process. I'll tell you that the first time around when we looked at moving it from a permanent to an annual, we were very, very deliberate in making that recommendation to you as a board, and that's because we had some areas of the district that were growing so fast that we'd allowed students to transfer in there when there were seats available. And as the neighborhood grew up around the school, we found that we couldn't serve the students of the neighborhood because we had so many students that had transferred in, but it was a 7-year transfer for them. And so we'd asked you as a board at that point in time to roll that back to 1 year, because that allowed us to better serve the students in that neighborhood, and then where seats were available to serve other students. I think one of the challenges that we have right now is, as a board, is you're very deliberate about your expectations to create attendance areas that have better balance. And as you go through that process, it's a little bit like squeezing a balloon, that if there's an opportunity to move and go somewhere else, it restricts your ability to make the changes that you want to make as a board if people have that opportunity to move away from the change that you're making. I can tell you that, and we've had this conversation as an administrative team, we're in the buildings all the time. We see the interactions that's taking place. We see the education that's happening out there. We've got amazing teachers in this district, and they are doing unbelievable work every day. And it doesn't matter what building you're in. You see that taking place. For years, I was just over at Twain, and I was telling them for years, I used them as an example because they were seeing more growth in their kindergarten students than any other kindergarten anywhere in the district. And I think that if we truly want to achieve some of the balance that you're looking at, we need to go back. We need to go back to what we talked about at the beginning of the presentation today, which is this idea about what neighborhood schools are. And if as a community we define our neighborhoods, and if part of that is where we live and how close we are to school and whether or not it's a walkable, sustainable neighborhood, then what we need to do is we need to build schools in those neighborhoods that meet the needs of the students that live in that neighborhood, all the students that live in that neighborhood.
Thank you. That's helpful to know what your recommendation is on this. And Amy and Matt, do you have anything else to add to Steve's recommendation? Okay. It's helpful. Okay, it's just helpful for me to know what you guys would recommend in this.
So just a reminder from a date standpoint, especially for those folks that are out in the audience that may have an interest in it. So we've got a work session tonight. We're talking a little bit about building blocks, and that's part of the next step in this process. And then we literally laid out every date. For those that are watching, we don't always have the batting order lined up for that work session, but we've got them calendared. This happens to be a 5 Tuesday month coming up in October. So you'll see that there's a work session potentially scheduled on the 2nd, a regular meeting on the 9th, with the potential for a work session following that, a work session on the 16th of October, regular meeting on the 23rd with the possibility of a work session after that, then a work session on the 30th, and another one on the 6th because there's a 2-week gap in between board meetings. And then that last board meeting prior to Thanksgiving is November 13th. And one of the things that, and I know sitting at the back of the table, you've heard Amy say this multiple times, but we would like hopefully to come to some type of resolution by the time we get to that meeting prior to Thanksgiving. That gives us the opportunity to work with the elementary schools between the Thanksgiving break and the winter break, and then come back after the winter break and have a good 5 months to work with the schools if there are any changes to any of those building blocks that we've talked about moving.
And that decision would be for the 2019-2020 school year.
That's correct. All right. Thank you.
Yes, all right, thanks, Steve. Moving on, we have a request to approve the allowable growth.
So moved.
Second.
Seconded. Kim, we're ready to vote.
Online voting is open. All votes have been cast, and the motion carries with all directors voting in favor.
All right, that puts us at agenda setting. So we talked about the meeting on the 2nd of October. And just to be so the public knows that October 2nd is the city council election in Iowa City for the vacant seats. So this space will be unavailable, so that meeting would be held at Southeast Junior High at 6 o'clock.
Is there any chance we could move it to one of the other junior highs just to demonstrate?
Help the people who live in other parts of the district.
What, Northwest?
More accessibility for
Doesn't
others?
Northwest have, they won't have voting because they would be, it's not Iowa City, right? Or
No,
City.
we certainly can. I know that there was some conversation about actually trying to pick a standard alternate location, just because we'd had some people that weren't sure where we were meeting, and so we had selected Southeast just so that people would know if we weren't here, we were there, but we could certainly move that. We're totally open to that. That's why you see us at Southeast when we're not here, so that people didn't have to guess where we were.
I actually think that's a good reason to keep it pretty consistent, even though I could have walked to Northwest.
All right, anything for the second meeting? Nothing. The meeting on the 7th is training for us. And then going into the 9th. The only thing that I would ask that maybe we could add, Steve, I had talked to you a little bit about the possibility of having a board communication tool, something similar to the SMORE newsletter or whatnot, to go out to the public that would come from the board to increase our communication out. And maybe we can just have a discussion item on that.
So that would be a discussion at the board table or at one of our work sessions?
Well, I would like to have it at the board table just because I think it's in front of the public to let them know what we're, at least share with them some ideas that maybe we might not be able to convey to communicate with them.
Yep, just wanted clarification. Thank you.
I'm wondering if we should put on as a placeholder the pairing discussion. just in case we want, there's, you know, a community session. I'm not sure if the Longfellow one has been scheduled yet, but might be before the 9th. If it were, it would be helpful to start discussing that, or maybe not. I just, I know we can't discuss it if it's not on the agenda, so it would just be a placeholder.
And
Yeah, I'm not sure what you're asking.
yeah, what would we discuss?
Just placing it there in case we would like to discuss something with pairing.
I guess I'm still confused. Well, that's what we were talking about at pretty much every work session and stuff we were having. So I'm wondering what specific.
So we've listed building blocks and maps. Does that include pairing?
You're talking about the work session?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Sorry, I was on the board meeting.
Yeah, that's why I was confused too. We're on the regular board meeting agenda.
Just make it an
So-
explicit item, right? Yep.
Gotcha.
If it's inclusive in that, then we don't need to, but if it's
Well,
not, then.
one of the things that we're trying to do is trying to be more, provide more specificity in the language on those items, especially either for people who are interested in coming or when we're looking backwards historically so we can find it. So that's a very easy one for us to add.
Anything else?
Well, and I probably should have brought it up when we were talking about this, the whole schedule for the voluntary transfer, and I know Lori brought this up at the last work session, that I think we really got to get a community session at some point in time on the schedule and schedule it so we can have community input on that.
Yeah,
I don't know if that's something
I think we're talking about that somewhat at our work session tonight, right?
We actually have that on the
On
work
the-
session agenda
okay,
tonight,
very
so we
good.
can definitely talk
Very
through
good.
that.
Anything else? Going once, going twice? For a motion to adjourn?
Move that we adjourn.
so moved.
And
Second.
Second.
second and moved. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We'll continue our work session in the back of the boardroom.
We got all the changes to the agenda done already. Diggity dog.